global approach based on solidarity and a more effective system for confronting biological challenges is needed. Dear colleagues, today, first and foremost, we need to close the gaps that made us vulnerable to the virus in the first place. That's why we are gathered in this special session for the sole purpose of considering the need and means to develop a WHO convention or international instrument on pandemic preparedness and response. I would like to thank the working group established at the ASAMBLEA for its preparatory work and report. Kazakhstan endorses the proposals for a WHO convention to strengthen pandemic preparedness and response. And in general, Kazakhstan supports WHO as a good and reliable partner of our government, and we positively assess personal contribution of WHO General Director Dr. Ghebreyesus to the fight of global community against the plight of the deadly disease. Ladies and gentlemen, the current pandemic is not purely a health emergency. Many would agree that the crisis has exposed not only structural weaknesses within countries and the national health systems, but also serious systemic inequalities at the global level. That's why Kazakhstan advocates for and actively contributes to the global equitable allocation of vaccines. We fully support the WHO strategy to achieve global vaccination against COVID-19 by mid-2022. For our part, we have developed and successfully modified the KazVac vaccine for the new Delta strain. It is not only being used efficiently in our country, but has also been authorized for the other countries of Central Asia. Dear friends, at the global level, like in any village or city, our prosperity, our shared wealth depends on our health. And our health depends on our solidarity and our coordinated response to common threats. I urge all countries to unite in achieving the goals under the stewardship of WHO. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. President, for those reassuring remarks. Before moving on to our next speaker, I would like to play a short video message on the COVID-19 response.
Every advance we made, be it in the diagnostics, be it in the vaccine, came as a response of sharing risk, sharing knowledge, and sharing capacity.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
J'ai l'honneur de souhaiter la
I now
bienvenue
have the honor of
à M.
welcoming
Alain Berset,
Mr. Alain
conseiller
Berset,
fédéral et chef du département fédéral
Federal
de l'Intérieur
Counselor and head of the
de la
Federal Department
Confédération
of Home
suisse,
Affairs of
et de l'inviter
the
à nous
Swiss
faire part de ses
Confederation,
observations.
and invite him to share certain remarks with us.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Directeur
Mr.
Général,
President,
Mesdames et
Director
Messieurs les
General,
ministres,
distinguished
Excellences,
ministers,
Mesdames et Messieurs les délégués,
distinguished
au
delegates,
nom de la Confédération
on behalf
suisse,
of the
je vous
Swiss
souhaite une
Confederation,
chaleureuse bienvenue à cette
I'd like to
session
warmly welcome you
extraordinaire
to
de
this
l'Assemblée
special
mondiale de la
session
santé,
of the World Health
placée sous le
Assembly
thème de la préparation et
on the
riposte aux
topic
pandémies.
of pandemic preparedness and response.
Après plus d'1 an et demi de pandémie, bientôt
After
2,
over a year and a
nous
half
avons aujourd'hui
of
l'occasion de
pandemic, almost
réfléchir
2 years,
de manière lucide
we now
aux
must
bouleversements
think
engendrés par le Covid-19.
carefully about the
L'occasion
consequences of the
peut-être de faire un pas de
COVID-19
côté
pandemic.
pour observer la situation,
We can take a step
ajuster
back,
certains de nos
observe
paramètres
the
fondamentaux.
situation, and adjust some of our fundamental
Oui, la
parameters.
pandémie de Covid-19 a pris le
The
monde au
COVID
dépourvu.
pandemic
Et
indeed
aujourd'hui,
took
nous
the world by
comptons plus de 5
surprise.
millions de morts.
And now we have
Aucun pays n'a été
recorded
épargné.
almost 5 million
Nous
deaths,
connaissons
sparing
toutes
no
et tous
country.
des proches qui, d'une manière ou d'une
We
autre, ont
all
été
have
touchés
loved ones
fortement par cette
affected
pandémie.
in one way or another by the
L'impact
pandemic.
social, l'impact économique a
The
été
social
douloureux.
and economic
Il continue aussi à
impact of the
l'être.
pandemic have been severe and continue
Les
to be
inégalités
so.
dans l'accès au vaccin restent un
Inequality
enjeu
in
crucial.
vaccine action
Et le nouveau
is
variant
an important issue.
nous rappelle
And the
que la
new
pandémie n'est
variant
pas
reminds
encore
us
derrière
all
nous.
that the pandemic is
Une
far
chose
from
est claire,
over.
nous devons tout mettre en
It is
œuvre
clear that we must do all
afin
we
qu'une
can
telle situation ne se
to ensure this
reproduise pas.
situation never
Nous devons
happens again,
remédier maintenant aux
We must
lacunes et
act
aux manquements
now
du dispositif en place.
to close
Il en
the
va de notre
gaps present
responsabilité
and fix
envers les générations
shortcomings. It's our
présentes et les
responsibility
générations
for
futures.
current and future generations.
Oui, nous le savons, la communauté
We
internationale
know that
n'était
the
pas
international
suffisamment préparée
community
à une
was not
pandémie
sufficiently
telle que le
prepared
Covid-19.
for a pandemic like
Il est
COVID-19.
indéniable que nous serons à nouveau
It's
confrontés à
clear
des risques
that we
sanitaires au
are
niveau
once
global.
again
Il est donc essentiel de travailler.
Therefore, we must work
Afin de
together,
mieux nous
showing
préparer.
our collective
Il
will
s'agit maintenant
to
de
prepare
rendre nos
better
actions plus
next
fortes,
time, to take stronger
rapides,
action,
plus
faster
équitables.
action, more
Nous devons
equitable
mieux
action.
répartir les ressources et nous devons investir davantage dans la prévention au niveau national et au niveau international. La crise actuelle montre à quel point il est indispensable de disposer d'une organisation mondiale de la santé qui soit forte, qui soit efficace et universelle et qui soit engagée sur le long terme. Et pour la Suisse, l'OMS demeure le centre de la gouvernance mondiale de la santé. Et pour remplir cet objectif et jouer son rôle de chef de file et de coordinatrice en matière de santé mondiale, l'organisation doit être bien équipée. En mai dernier, lors de la dernière assemblée, nous n'étions pas encore prêts à décider sous quelle forme ce renforcement devrait avoir lieu. Et entre-temps, le groupe de travail sur le renforcement de la préparation et de la riposte de l'OMS aux urgences sanitaires s'est réuni à plusieurs reprises pour examiner les avantages d'un nouvel instrument international. La Suisse soutient pleinement les recommandations de ce groupe de travail. Et sur cette base, nous, les États membres, devons prendre une décision sur la suite du processus. Je le sais, mesdames et messieurs, nous ne sommes pas tous d'accord sur le chemin à suivre. Nous en sommes également conscients en Suisse. Mais les enjeux sont beaucoup trop élevés. Nous n'avons pas le droit d'échouer. La Suisse reste convaincue qu'il faut un instrument international de nature contraignante, élaboré sous l'égide de l'OMS pour renforcer la préparation et la riposte globale aux crises sanitaires. Nous souhaitons également une meilleure application du règlement sanitaire international. Dans ce cadre, nous sommes prêts à œuvrer de manière constructive, engagée pour une décision consensuelle à ce sujet. Et nous nous engageons à jouer un rôle actif dans les efforts mondiaux visant à renforcer le système international de préparation et de réponse aux pandémies. Il s'agit de trouver ensemble, dans le cadre d'un dialogue ouvert, dans le cadre d'un dialogue pragmatique, des solutions que nos citoyennes et citoyens attendent avec une très grande impatience. Je vous souhaite, je nous souhaite des débats fructueux au cours de cette session extraordinaire de l'Assemblée mondiale de la santé. Prenons les décisions qui s'imposent pour avancer. Mais nous y parviendrons seulement si nous continuons à unir nos forces dans un cadre multilatéral transparent et crédible, celui de l'OMS. Le monde nous regarde. Saisissons l'opportunité de cette conférence et soyons audacieux. Merci de votre attention.
Merci, Monsieur Berset. J'ai maintenant le plaisir d'inviter Son Excellence, Madame Angela Merkel, chancelière de la République fédérale d'Allemagne. Madame la Chancelière, vous avez la parole.
Sehr geehrter Herr Generalsekretär, lieber Tedros, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Die Coronavirus-Pandemie prägt weiterhin unseren Alltag. Sie hat Schwachstellen aufgezeigt, sie hat aber auch unsere Solidarität in dieser schwierigen Zeit offenbart. Dabei kommt der Weltgesundheitsorganisation die zentrale Rolle zu, die Koordinierung der zahlreichen Initiativen in globalen Gesundheitsfragen sicherzustellen. Bei der Umsetzung internationaler Gesundheitsvorschriften, bei der Entsendung wissenschaftlicher Experten, die die Ursprünge von Viren und Infektionsausbrüchen erforschen, oder bei der Gestaltung eines neuen Fonds für globale Gesundheitssicherheit. Angesichts dieser und vieler anderer wichtiger Aufgaben gilt es vor allem für eine verlässliche Finanzierung der WHO zu sorgen. Sie muss in Krisensituationen schnell reagieren und Prioritäten neu setzen können. Daher wünsche ich mir, dass wir, die Mitgliedstaaten, unsere ungebundenen Pflichtbeiträge deutlich, das heißt auf 50%, erhöhen. Die katastrophalen gesundheitlichen und wirtschaftlichen Folgen der Coronavirus-Pandemie sollten uns eine Lehre sein. Viren kennen keine Ländergrenzen. Genau deshalb sollten wir unsere Maßnahmen für eine bessere Prävention, Früherkennung und Reaktion in einem Pandemievertrag völkerrechtlich verbindlich festhalten. Ich sage ganz bewusst wir. Dabei erinnere ich an ein bekanntes Sprichwort, das lautet: Wer alleine arbeitet, addiert. Wer zusammenarbeitet, multipliziert. Lassen Sie uns in diesem Sinne künftigen Bedrohungen unserer Gesundheit mit vereinten Kräften entgegenwirken. Und lassen Sie uns eher heute als morgen verlässliche Grundlagen dafür schaffen. Ihnen allen, die Sie sich hierfür stark machen, danke ich von Herzen. Alles Gute für Sie und natürlich bleiben Sie gesund.
Merci, Madame la Chancelière. J'ai le plaisir d'inviter Son Excellence, Monsieur Sebastián Piñera, président de la République du Chili, à prendre la parole.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Tedros, for inviting me to be part of this pivotal moment in the history of the World Health Organization, but also in the history of mankind's efforts to effectively control the spread of contagious diseases. And I say this with full awareness of the weight of my words, because the meeting that we inaugurate today is not an ordinary meeting. All of you present in Geneva today face an unprecedented challenge, but also an unprecedented opportunity, one that can make the difference between life and death for millions and millions of people all around the world. During the last 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have all witnessed the tremendous effort put by this organization, by its personnel, and by Dr. Tedros himself. Their tireless work provided us and many other countries with key guidelines and recommendations throughout the darkest part of this pandemic. And they have remained available to provide further advice whenever it was requested or necessary. I know this because I have spoken numerous times with Dr. Tedros, with Dr. Ryans, and with Dr. Llanes, and they have provided invaluable advice that has helped us shape our response to the virus through the strengthening of our health system, the implementation of our testing, tracing, and isolation strategy, our step-by-step plan, and also our massive and successful vaccination program. However, despite all of their heroic efforts, it was not enough. And it was not enough, not because of them, but because the system that we had in place to prepare and respond to pandemics was clearly insufficient. Sadly, this organization was not adequately prepared to face the challenge. It didn't have the tools and the resources that it required to fulfill the crucial role we all expected it to play. And for that weakness, we all paid a great price, a price that was far too high. Steps must be taken to ensure that this will not happen again, that when the next pandemic comes, and it will come, it will find us better prepared, with stronger institutions, with more resources, and with better infrastructure in place. Today, the responsibility to take the first of these steps falls upon you. The working group on strengthening the World Health Organization preparedness and response to health emergency has done a very good job. It has issued a report that will be put before you during this assembly, recommending actions and negotiations to develop a convention, a treaty, or other form of international instrument on pandemic preparedness and response. While you assess this proposal, I humbly ask you to keep in mind two things. First, we cannot keep doing the same thing, employing the same methods, trusting the same instrument, and expect different results. Non-binding instrument will also get us so far, and this is nowhere near far enough. And second, we have already lost enough during the last 2 years. We have lost enough freedom and opportunities. We have lost enough in terms of well-being and quality of life. But above all, and most painfully, we have lost too many lives. You are now responsible for starting the process that will lead all of humanity towards better instruments to ensure that never again are we forced to pay such a high toll. You are all called to ensure that never again the lack of transparency, cooperation, solidarity, and coordination between countries causes avoidable human suffering and death at the scale that has been inflicted upon us during the last 2 years. The mission of this assembly is not easy, but the important tasks never are. This, however, should not discourage us, but on the contrary, should move us to become even more ambitious and determined. A treaty on pandemic, preparedness, and response, containing binding obligation, will not be easy to negotiate, and it will require sacrifices and concessions from all the parties involved on its drafting process. But it will be easier, and it will require less sacrifices and less concessions than facing the next pandemic with the same or similar inadequacy that our current system has. Today, through the development of a convention or treaty on pandemic preparedness and response under the World Health Organization umbrella, we have an opportunity to effectively improve our system, to strengthen the global health architecture, to create new channels for information sharing, to promote scientific and technological progress, to increase cooperation and solidarity between our countries, and to make sure that humanity does not go through the last 2 years all over. We must be bold enough to take this opportunity. We cannot afford not to. Thank you very much, and have a very good day.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'invite maintenant avec plaisir Son Altesse Royale, le Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, Prince héritier et Premier ministre du Royaume du Bahreïn, à prononcer son allocution.
Your Excellency, Madam President, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, on behalf of His Majesty the King of Bahrain and the people of Bahrain, thank you for having me speak to you this morning. As a global community, we have for decades ignored the urgent calls of public health experts who time and again warned us of fault lines in the global health order and the glaring health disparities between and within nations. Today, as we mourn the loss of over 5 million fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters, and as we begin the difficult task of rebuilding the lives of those who survived this devastating pandemic, we must finally be prepared to listen and to act. The coronavirus exposed the world's lack of preparedness and exploited the links that bind us. Without a global plan of action, countries around the world turned inwards, and as a result, we witnessed the breakdown of early detection and alert systems, the absence of standardized containment protocols, the proliferation of misinformation, and a spate of market shocks and supply chain disruptions, which still leave many without ready access to essential goods, diagnostic tools, treatments, and vaccines. It is imperative that we do not lull ourselves into complacency with the false belief that this pandemic is a once-in-a-century anomaly. Instead, we must seize upon this opportunity to enact real change, to approach global pandemic preparedness with the same determination we bring to geopolitical threats to our collective safety and security. Only then will we be able to build a global health system that can one day serve as our first and most effective line of defense against the emergence of communicable diseases. The Kingdom of Bahrain recognized, as the coronavirus was just beginning to gather steam and before it reached our shores, that preparedness and collaboration would determine our ability to successfully navigate a crisis of this magnitude. A full month before registering our first case, we established a war room that would serve as the nerve center of the country's containment efforts, marshalling resources and people from military and civilian agencies to coordinate a whole-of-country response. Bahrain adopted a policy of radical transparency which fostered a sense of public trust and collective responsibility. Community leaders, medical practitioners, policymakers, citizens, and residents all came together to form one team that united around a firm sense of shared purpose. This spirit of unity permeated every corner of society. For example, over 50,000 citizens in a country of just 1.5 million people offered their services as volunteers in many different fields. Armed with this team spirit, we were able to increase bed capacity by a factor of 6, secure alternative housing for people living in crowded accommodation, and equip hospitals with enough PPE, ventilators, and medicine. As a result, Bahrain has one of the highest recovery rates in the world, as well as a vaccination coverage of 93% of the eligible population, of which approximately 50% have now been boosted to date. But physical health was not our only priority. Economic and mental health featured prominently in our response. With community buy-in and a world-leading test, trace, and treat system, we were able to avoid the brunt of the crisis without ever having to institute a national-level lockdown. Bahrain's efforts, however effective as a national-level response, are no substitute for a global public health system capable of stopping a pathogen in its tracks. But our experience is instructive insofar as it testifies to the life and death importance of preparedness and early intervention, and demonstrates the value of transparency, collaboration, and an enduring commitment to data-driven, science-led policymaking. We believe these same principles should guide our discussions here today. Ladies and gentlemen, the coronavirus has beset the world with many challenges. None, however, are insurmountable if we are willing to work together. Over the last 2 years, we have witnessed scientists from across the world leapfrog years of research to develop highly effective vaccines in record time. And while the pandemic is full of similar moonshot moments, we have to ensure equal and ready access to these game-changing innovations, particularly in the context of new emerging variants. In fact, vaccine coverage, which stands at over 40% globally, falls under 3% in some countries. And with around 1 billion idle doses in other nations, millions of avoidable deaths are likely to occur. We can solve this challenge and others if only we muster the political will to once again look outwards. It is our hope that the nations of the world will join forces and heed the lessons of this crisis in pursuit of a united front that serves the moral imperative of protecting present and future generations from the scourge of pandemics. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monseigneur. J'ai le plaisir d'inviter à présent Son Excellence, M. Lionel Rouen Ndjimea, président de la République de Nauru, à nous faire part de ses observations.
As President of the World Health Assembly, Director General of the World Health Organization, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, warm greetings from Nauru. I am honored to have been invited to make an opening statement at this special session, convened to discuss and assess the benefits of developing a World Health Organization Convention agreement or other international instrument on pandemic preparedness and response. Mr. Vice President, by God's grace, Nauru remains COVID-free today. We have been very fortunate to receive vaccines through the COVAX facility and through our key development partners. However, much of the developing world remains without adequate supplies, and 2 years after the onset of the pandemic, continue to fight the spread of COVID-19. Our prayers and thoughts are with those who have lost loved ones to the pandemic. In March 2020, the government of the Republic of Nauru instigated a whole-of-government approach to address, capture, contain, and mitigate the risk of pandemic to our island. This approach was and continues to be coordinated by a national task force on COVID-19, mandated by government to determine, implement, and regulate, including stringent border security and health security measures. Government's quick and sustained actions could not have been possible without the support provided by our partners. Fostering intersectoral and intergovernmental cooperation and collaboration is essential if we are to successfully institute a global response and preparedness to COVID-19 and future pandemics. It is therefore imperative that an intergovernmental process, if it were to be established, be diverse and inclusive, ensuring that all stakeholders, not only member countries, are engaged. Continuing to omit countries like the Republic of China, Taiwan creates a gap that undermines global preparedness and response to health emergencies. I urge that we learn from the experience of this pandemic, honor the lives of those lost, and develop and establish an inclusive process to collectively and globally be better prepared to effectively respond to future pandemics and health emergencies. Mr. Vice President, the Republic of Nauru acknowledges the work done by the Working Group on strengthening WHO preparedness and response to health emergencies. Nauru agrees with the general consensus that several key aspects of health emergency preparedness and response may not be addressed solely within the scope of the International Health Regulations 2005, and may be best to address independently either through a potential new instrument or through other normative policy or programmatic tool available through WHO. There is a need for clarity on the way forward with an early decision to whether to strengthen the international health regulations and or to develop a new instrument on health security and pandemic preparedness and response. Due consideration needs to be given to what is currently a global issue of inequitable access to vaccines, diagnostic tools, personal protective equipment, medical consumables, and essential drugs, including new approved drug regimes. The need for sharing data and lesson learning has taken on an increased urgency in this pandemic, as it can literally mean life or death to our people. As this pandemic unfolds, it is clear that no one is safe until we are all safe. The Republic of Nauru, like so many of the small island developing, struggle to sustain this health system under normal times. Given the increasing burden of communicable and non-communicable diseases, therefore enhancing surge capacity needs to be considered on both a country and regional level. The Republic of Nauru supports the call for sustainable financing of the World Health Organization and the potential benefits it would bring. However, in embracing a One Health approach, we need to recognize health as an economic good and therefore need stronger engagement with international financial institutions, private enterprises, and developed economies. Nauru supports all efforts for strengthening global health governance and takes this opportunity to request that future governance arrangements include WHO regions to ensure inclusive dialogue of all stakeholders, particularly across Pacific Island countries. We further note that there is an immediate need to ensure that the special interests of island nations are adequately considered, particularly to ensure equity access to low, middle-income member states. Mr. Vice President, leaving no one behind is a global responsibility. Only through unity and inclusiveness can the global community triumph over this pandemic and future health emergencies, ensuring that no one is indeed left behind. Dubakar, I thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. C'est le plaisir d'inviter Son Excellence, Monsieur Charles Michel, Président du Conseil européen.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, first, I'd like to congratulate you for your courage and for your ambition in organizing this special session of the World Health Assembly. This is only the second time in the history of the World Health Organization that an extraordinary session takes place. Dear friends, today, I hope we'll make history. The situation in the world demands it. As we speak, the world faces yet another wave of COVID-19, a clear reminder of our duty to our citizens and to each other. Our collective responsibility to never let another pandemic find us unprepared, uncoordinated, or working in isolation from one another. The outcome of this session and your decisions today are vital to how we will cooperate in the future, how we will prevent, prepare for, detect, and respond to health threats in the future. As you know, I've been a strong advocate for an international treaty or legally binding instrument on pandemic preparedness. We need an incremental change in our global health architecture. I want to warmly and sincerely thank you, Dr. Tedros, for our excellent cooperation and the many leaders and countries that have joined us. All of us, political leaders and leaders of international organizations, must be at the forefront of these global efforts. We must show the world that we can cooperate, build bridges, and find joint solutions. There is no silver bullet, no single way out, and there are no easy solutions in managing the massive challenges of global health threats. But we have already shown that when we do work together, human ingenuity knows no bounds. Developing vaccines in just 10 months is a perfect example, nothing short of a miracle. And now it's time for you, the World Health Assembly, to provide the legal framework for these sustainable solutions. We must guarantee that if another pandemic strikes, we have the vaccines we need along with all other countermeasures. And just as crucially, we must ensure equitable access to these countermeasures. We simply cannot allow the same inequality we have seen and continue to see to repeat itself in future pandemics. That's why we must act One Health. We have a unique opportunity to go to the heart of prevention, and I'm referring to One Health. This is not just a concept. We must translate it into concrete action and tangible instruments. Scientists expect that 70% of future pandemics will stem from zoonotic diseases. So we must better understand the links between human, animal, and environmental health. The One Health approach is not a luxury, it's a must-have for future global health. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you again for your dedication and your efforts to improve global health governance, and for your hard work during this pandemic, and your commitment to prevent the next one. The world is counting on you, and together, let's take bold and decisive action. Yesterday's informal agreement is a huge step. Now it's time to capitalize on this momentum to make the world a safer place for all our citizens. I wish you a fruitful and successful session. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'ai maintenant l'honneur d'inviter Son Excellence, Madame Ursula von der Leyen, Présidente de la Commission européenne, à prendre la parole.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to salute the determination and the commitment of WHO members, as well as yours personally, dear Dr. Tedros. You and your team have worked tirelessly to uphold the multilateral framework that is so essential for global health security, even when it was difficult to do so. The spirit of collective action is the only true robust answer to fight this pandemic and to fight future pandemics. We started some of that work at the G20 Global Health Summit in May, where the world's major economies vowed to work together to make this the last global pandemic. And with the Rome Declaration signed on that day, we committed to learning the lessons from this pandemic and to be better prepared for the future. And this is why I welcome the World Health Assembly's decision to start negotiations towards an international agreement or other international instrument to strengthen pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. I also support targeted improvements to the 2005 International Health Regulations, an overall strengthening of the WHO so important, and the establishment of a new financial intermediary fund for global health security and pandemic preparedness. From our side, the European Commission looks forward to inclusive multilateral negotiations starting next year. But there can be no standstill in a pandemic, and we still have urgent tasks ahead of us. As we speak, the global community is faced with the threat of a new, highly transmissible variant of COVID-19, Omicron. This is not the first variant, and this time the world showed it is learning. And I want to say explicitly that I'm personally grateful to the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa for that. South Africa's analytic work and transparency in sharing its results was indispensable in allowing a swift global response. It no doubt saved many lives, and it is a model of how international cooperation should work in the face of cross-border health threats. Because only collective, effective, and immediate responses can work against viruses that, of course, do not respect either borders or good intentions. At the Global Health Summit in May, we agreed to uphold the principles of equity and good governance. We agreed to make multilateral cooperation and solidarity the only viable way forward. The G20 summit repeated that pledge last month in Rome, and you can count on the European Union to make good on that. The European Union and its member states will work very hard to achieve the global vaccination target of 70% in 2022, agreed at the recent G20 summit. And we will support capacity building for sequencing, testing, treatments, and of course, vaccination. We know we can get there, and we will make sure we do. And this is why Europe aims at sharing at least 700 million doses of vaccines by mid-2022 with low and middle income countries. It is why we helped create the ACT Accelerator and provided €3 billion funding, especially for global vaccination through COVAX. And it is also why we are investing heavily in vaccine manufacturing in Africa. And we are also engaging on vaccine manufacturing with South America. Together with our partners, we will do everything needed to overcome this pandemic and to be better prepared for the future. I wish you a successful World Health Assembly. You have an important work ahead of you, and I very much thank you for your attention.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. J'ai le plaisir d'inviter le Dr Richard Hachette, président directeur général de la Coalition pour les innovations en matière de préparation aux épidémies, à prendre la parole.
Director General Tedros, Mr. Vice President, Your Excellencies, thank you for the invitation to speak at this special session of the World Health Assembly on behalf of the organizations composing the ACT Accelerator. When this special session was planned, we did not anticipate that it would convene at a moment of impending crisis, nor could we have imagined that any crisis could so perfectly epitomize why this special session and the global framework for pandemic preparedness and response that we hope will emerge from it is so necessary. For the emergence of the Omicron variant has fulfilled in a precise way the predictions of the scientists who warned that the elevated transmission of the virus in areas with limited access to vaccine would speed its evolution. Having fully vaccinated less than a quarter of their populations, Botswana and South Africa provided a fertile environment for such evolution. The virus is a ruthless opportunist, and the inequity that has characterized the global response has now come home to roost. The cases were picked up, however, only because Botswana and South Africa do have access to diagnostics and among the highest testing rates on the continent, performing nearly 1 daily COVID-19 test per 1,000 people. This rate is low compared to much of the world, but much higher than in other parts of Africa. And South Africa has first-rate genomic sequencing capabilities, something many countries around the world lack, which helped us recognize almost immediately how dangerous this new virus may be. South Africa and Botswana's efficient surveillance, early detection and warning, and sharing of information have granted the world precious time to implement containment measures and time to prepare. Our industry partners are now intensively investigating whether our current vaccines have been compromised and consulting with regulators in WHO as they develop new ones just in case. As you embark on this historic special session, I would urge you to keep this example, which is right in front of you, in mind. The world is at a crossroads. We know we will face future global infectious disease emergencies and potential pandemic threats. That is a certainty. What happens when these threats materialize, however, is up to us, and in a very tangible sense, up to you. We urgently need a global framework or convention on pandemic preparedness and response if we are to have any hope of preventing future pandemics, accelerating the global availability of critical medical countermeasures, and ensuring more just outcomes than we have achieved with COVID. We have said often, all of us, that no one is safe unless everyone is safe. And now I would add, and hope all of you agree, and unless all are prepared to respond and to act in accordance with globally agreed norms when new threats emerge. Epidemics and pandemics are one of the greatest threats we will face in the 21st century. Next to climate change, perhaps the greatest. To counter them in the future, we must learn from this experience. We cannot rely on the uncoordinated action of nearly 200 sovereign states to deliver results better than those we have observed to date. We must strengthen the institutions we have, including the technical agencies that I represent here today. And crucially, we must agree on principles for the sharing of data, specimens, and countermeasures, including vaccines. Thank you, and I wish you a successful meeting.
Merci, Dr. Hachette. Enfin, j'ai le plaisir d'inviter professeur Dal Fischer, président du comité d'orientation du réseau mondial d'alerte et d'action en cas d'épidémie, à présenter ses observations.
Network was established by WHO in 2000 and now engages over 270 technical, operational and academic institutions to support countries in alert and rapid response to infectious disease outbreaks and other health emergencies. In addition, it leads research and training endeavours that aim to improve the quality of outbreak response. We thank the IPPPR, IHR Review Committee and the IOAC for acknowledging this work by Goan partners in their reports. Outbreaks expose vulnerabilities in any setting and any capacity, whether they relate to governance, resources, or systems. The foundation of outbreak resilience is built on sound preparedness with robust health systems and healthy populations. Building emergency capability requires coordination to enable a rapid scaling up of the core capacities, including clinical care, surveillance, contact tracing, quarantine, and isolation. Other critical systems to scale in an emergency, such as COVID-19, include laboratory capacity, logistics, infection prevention and control, while maintaining usual essential health services. Community engagement is repeatedly underestimated in outbreaks and continues as a notable challenge in this pandemic. The basics of outbreak response need to be better appreciated and supported by leadership, engaging the right outbreak responders, public health experts and scientists to support implementation. GOAN network partners have over the past 21 years been involved in all major outbreaks and deployed over 3,500 experts through WHO to support countries for response. Trust, credibility and expertise has been built based on the personal integrity, ethics and commitment of individual experts with support from their primary institutions. Our collaboration of robust technical and scientific skills can provide a bedrock of preparedness, networking and strengthening international solidarity in addition to acute response. Investments in national public health institutions, technical institutions and networks will benefit all if conceived within a global collaborative spirit that GOAN demonstrates. We advocate for a building block investment in community and national capacities. Our network partners can support this. We believe in strengthening national health authorities, technical agencies and multi-sectoral stakeholders. Global health security requires enhanced governance in the broadest sense. Equity, greater accountability and adherence to international norms and standards are essential for effective outbreak response and to protect and support the most vulnerable. The operational capacities of our 270 experienced technical partners that form the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network can be leveraged to help develop better systems and expand the emergency health workforce at country and international levels. But this requires investment in those partners and increased technical collaboration and coordination, which is quite feasible building on the existing GOAN paradigm. Thank you for giving GOAN this opportunity.
Merci, professeur Fischer. Nous tenons à remercier sincèrement tous nos éminents invités pour leurs paroles d'encouragement et pour avoir rappelé la nécessité de la solidarité mondiale. J'ai l'honneur d'inviter à présent le directeur général de l'Organisation mondiale de la santé. Dr. Tedros, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Your Excellency, President of the Assembly, Professor Benjamin Hong-Patin, Your Excellency, Dr. Hanan Al-Kuwari, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends. I thank His Excellency, President Tokayev, for his participation and message this morning. And I thank each of our distinguished guests for their messages. Federal Chancellor Alain Berset of Switzerland, Chancellor Merkel of Germany, President Piñera of Chile, His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Hamad of Bahrain, and President Ainigema of Nauru, President Michel of EU Council, and President von der Leyen of EU Commission, Dr. Hachette of CEPI, and Dr. Fischer of GORN. Everybody knows that pestilences have a way of recurring in the world. There have been as many plagues as wars in history. Yet always plagues and wars take people equally by surprise. Those words were written by the French writer Albert Camus in his classic novel La Peste, The Plague, in 1947. 74 years later, they have a disturbing presence. Outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics are a fact of nature and a recurring feature of recorded history. from the plague of Athens in 4030 BC to the Black Death, the 1918 influenza pandemic, and now COVID-19. But that does not mean we're helpless to prevent them, prepare for them, or mitigate their impact. We're not prisoners of fate or nature. More than any humans in history, we have the ability to anticipate pandemics, to prepare for them, to unravel the genetics of pathogens, to detect them at their earliest stages, to prevent them spiraling into global disasters, and to respond when they do. And yet, here we are, entering the third year of the most acute health crisis in a century, and the world remains in its grip. This pestilence, one that we can prevent, detect and treat, continues to cast a long shadow over the world. Instead of meeting in the aftermath of the pandemic, we're meeting as a fresh wave of cases and disease crashes into Europe, with untold and uncounted deaths around the world. And although other regions are seeing declining or stable trends, if there is one thing we have learned, it's that no region, no country, no community, and no individual is safe until we are all safe. The emergence of the highly mutated Omicron variant underlines just how perilous and precarious our situation is. South Africa and Botswana should be thanked for detecting, sequencing, and reporting this variant, not penalized. Indeed, Omicron demonstrates just why the world needs a new accord on pandemics. Our current system disincentivizes countries from alerting others to threats that will inevitably land on their shores. We don't yet know whether Omicron is associated with more transmission, more severe disease, more risk of reinfections, or more risk of evading vaccines. Scientists at WHO and around the world are working urgently to answer these questions. We shouldn't need another wake-up call. We should all be wide awake to the threat of this virus. But Omicron's very emergence is another reminder that although many of us might think we're done with COVID-19, it's not done with us. We're living through a cycle of panic and neglect. Hard-won gains could vanish in an instant. Our most immediate task, therefore, is to end this pandemic. Indeed, our ability to end this pandemic is a test of our collective ability to prevent, respond effectively to future pandemics, because the same principles apply. The same principles: courageous and compassionate leadership, fidelity to science, generosity in sharing the fruits of research, and an unshakable commitment to equity and solidarity. If we cannot apply those principles now to tame COVID-19, how can we hope to prevent history repeating? And we cannot end this pandemic unless we solve the vaccine crisis. In less than a year, almost 8 billion vaccines have been administered around the world, the largest vaccination campaign in history. More than a year ago, before the first vaccines were approved, WHO and our partners established the ACT Accelerator COVAX and CETAP to facilitate equitable access to vaccines, tests, treatments, and PPE. And we have shown that these mechanisms work. COVAX has now shipped more than 550 million vaccine doses, including almost 250 million doses in the last 2 months, more than it shipped in the first 7 months of this year. Last week, CETAP and the Medicines Patent Pool finalized its first licensing agreement with the Spanish National Research Council, a transparent, global, and non-exclusive license for a serological antibody test. My thanks to Spain and to His Excellency President Carlos Alvarado Quesada of Costa Rica for his leadership in initiating CETAP. So thanks to the President of Spain, President Pedro, and also President of Costa Rica, President Quesada. Earlier this year, we also established a technology transfer hub for mRNA vaccines in South Africa to facilitate local production and regional self-reliance. But a year ago, as we began to see some countries striking bilateral deals with manufacturers, we warned that the poorest and most vulnerable would be trampled in the global stampede for vaccines. And that's exactly what has happened. More than 80% of the world's vaccines have gone to G20 countries. Low-income countries, most of them in Africa, have received just 0.6% of all vaccines. We understand and support every government's responsibility to protect its own people. It's natural. But vaccine equity is not charity. It's in every country's best interests. No country can vaccinate its way out of the pandemic alone. The longer vaccine inequity persists, the more opportunity this virus has to spread and evolve in ways we cannot predict nor prevent. We're all in this together. We call on every member state to support the targets to vaccinate 40% of the population of every country by the end of this year, and 70% by the middle of next year. 103 countries still have not reached the 40% target, and more than half of them are at risk of missing it by the end of the year, mainly because they cannot access the vaccines they need, and most of them in Africa. Even as some countries are now beginning to vaccinate groups at very low risk of severe disease, or to give boosters to healthy adults, just 1 in 4 health workers in Africa has been vaccinated. This is unacceptable. With emerging evidence of some waning vaccine immunity against infection, it's clear that in future countries will need tailored booster strategies. WHO's position remains that health workers, older people, and other at-risk groups must be vaccinated first in all countries before those at low risk of serious disease and before boosters are given to already vaccinated healthy adults. There is no doubt that vaccines have saved many lives and helped to quell the pandemic in many countries. Countries that have achieved the highest vaccination rates are now seeing a decoupling between cases and deaths. But in too many countries and communities, the bright light of vaccines has also become a blinding light to the continued need for other tools to stop this virus spreading, to stop it overwhelming our health systems, and to stop it killing. Vaccines save lives, but they do not fully prevent infection or transmission. Until we reach high levels of vaccination in every country, suppressing transmission remains essential. We don't mean lockdowns, which are a last resort in the most extreme circumstances. We mean a tailored and comprehensive package of measures that strike a balance between protecting the rights, freedoms, and livelihoods of individuals while protecting the health and safety of the most vulnerable members of communities. Ending this pandemic is not about vaccines or, it's about vaccines and. Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, COVID-19 has now killed more than 5 million people, and they're just the reported deaths. The excess deaths caused by the virus and by disruption to essential health services are far higher. An unknown number live with post-COVID condition or long COVID, a condition we're only beginning to understand. Health systems continue to be overwhelmed. Millions have missed out on essential life-saving health services for non-communicable diseases and mental health. Progress against HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, and many other diseases has stalled or gone backwards. Millions of children have missed out on vaccinations for other life-threatening diseases and months of education. Millions of people have lost their jobs or been plunged into poverty. The global economy is still clawing its way out of recession. Political divisions have deepened nationally and globally. Inequalities have widened. Science has been undermined. Misinformation has abounded. And it will all happen again unless you, the nations of the world, can come together to say with one voice, never again. At its heart, the pandemic is a crisis of solidarity and sharing. The lack of sharing of information and data by many countries in the early days of the pandemic hindered our collective ability to get a clear picture of its profile and trajectory. The lack of sharing of biological samples hindered our collective ability to understand how the virus was evolving. The lack of sharing of PPE, tests, vaccines, technology, know-how, intellectual property, and other tools hindered our collective ability to prevent infections and save lives. And the lack of a consistent and coherent global approach has resulted in a splintered and disjointed response, breeding misunderstanding, misinformation, and mistrust. The fabric of multilateralism has been frayed. COVID-19 has exposed and exacerbated fundamental weaknesses in the global architecture for pandemic preparedness and response. Complex and fragmented governance, inadequate financing, and insufficient systems and tools, voluntary mechanisms have not solved these challenges. The best way we can address them is with a legally binding agreement between nations, an accord forged from the recognition that we have no future but a common future. Nations coming together to find common ground is the only way to make sustainable progress against common threats. It's not perfect, and it's not a panacea. It takes compromise. No one gets everything they want, but that's better than so many missing out on what they need. In 2005, the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control came into force, the first international treaty negotiated under the World Health Organization. An independent impact assessment of the FCTC, the convention in 2016, found it has contributed to significant and rapid progress in protecting people from exposure to tobacco smoke. In regulating the packaging and labeling of tobacco products, in education, communication, training, and public awareness, in banning sales to and by minors, and in reporting and exchange of information. The WHO FCTC is the legal bedrock of tobacco control, which countries have used to implement new measures and to defend those measures from legal challenges. The bottom line, the implementation of the FCTC has helped to save more than 37 million lives and counting, and global prevalence of tobacco use has declined from almost 33% in 2000 to 22% today. The impact assessment found that without the FCTC, it's unlikely that all these tobacco control measures would have taken place in such a comprehensive, coordinated, and effective manner. So, comprehensive, coordinated, effective. Three words that history will not use to describe the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, if countries can unite to negotiate a treaty against the human-made threat of tobacco, against the destructive potential of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, against the existential threat of climate change, and against so many other threats to our shared security and well-being, then surely, very surely, the time has come for countries to agree on a common, binding approach to a common threat that we cannot fully control nor prevent, a threat that comes from our relationship with nature itself. I thank and congratulate all member states for the spirit of solidarity and the inclusive process that has resulted in the agreed text of the decision that's before you at this assembly. I thank Indonesia and the United States of America for their leadership of the working group on strengthening WHO preparedness, as well as the other members of the Bureau, Botswana, France, Iraq, and Singapore. I also thank Australia and Chile for their leadership in developing the decision that you will consider at this assembly. And I thank the President Charles Michel of European Council for proposing the idea of a binding agreement on pandemics and for his leadership and tireless advocacy. Thank you, my friend. And this is a historic moment, but it's just the end of the beginning. We still have a long road to travel together. Reaching our destination will take negotiation, compromise, and time. The task is urgent, but it also requires patience. The stakes are high, but so are the rewards. A convention, agreement, or other international instrument will not solve every problem, but it will provide the overarching framework to foster greater international cooperation and provide a platform for strengthening global health security in 4 key areas. First, better governance. The governance of global health security is complex, fragmented, and has failed to ensure effective collective action and equitable access to vaccines and other tools. High-level threats need high-level political engagement, which is why we support the idea of a Heads of State Council proposed by the IPPR, the panel, anchored in WHO to provide high-level political leadership for rapid and coordinated action. I propose the Council could be supported by a ministerial standing committee under the Executive Board, which is already proposed and waiting, hopefully, approval during our upcoming board meeting. Second, better financing. Cycles of panic and neglect have created an unstable and unpredictable financing ecosystem for global health security. Strengthening the world's defenses demands financing that's truly additional, predictable, equitable, and aligned with national, regional, and global priorities. A mechanism funded solely from voluntary development assistance will only increase competition for already scarce resources. WHO supports the idea of a financial intermediary fund supported by a secretariat based at WHO, housed at the World Bank, and financed by countries and regional organizations on a burden-sharing basis. Third, we need better systems and tools to predict, prevent, detect, and respond rapidly to outbreaks with epidemic and pandemic potential. Already, the Secretariat has taken steps to start building some of those systems and tools. In September, we opened the WHO Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence in Berlin, a new center designed to enhance global surveillance by harnessing the power of collaborative and artificial intelligence and other cutting-edge technologies. Other initiatives are in development, including the WHO BioHub system to provide a reliable, safe, predictable, and transparent mechanism for countries to share novel biological materials. Several member states are now piloting the Universal Health and Preparedness Review, a peer review mechanism for enhancing national preparedness modeled on the Universal Periodic Review used by the United Nations Human Rights Council. This was suggested by my friend, Ambassador Sambo of Central African Republic, and thank you, Ambassador Sambo, and it's going well. And last week, the Scientific Advisory Group for the Origins of Novel Pathogens, or SEGO, held its first meeting, a new permanent body to establish a more systematic way of identifying the source of new outbreaks. At the same time, we must use and enhance the tools we already have, including the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network, GORN, and the Global Influenza Surveillance and Response Systems, GISRIS, and the Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework. And fourth, the world needs a strengthened, empowered, and sustainably financed WHO at the center of the global health architecture. With 194 member states and 152 country offices, WHO has unique expertise, a unique global mandate, unique global reach, and unique global legitimacy. But over several decades, WHO has been progressively weakened by a debilitating imbalance between assessed and voluntary earmarked contributions that distorts our budget and constrains our ability to deliver what you, our member states, expect of us. The widening mismatch between the expectations of WHO and its resources is well known. COVID-19 must be the catalyst to rectify it. If not now, when? I ask all member states to support the proposal in the draft report of the Working Group on Sustainable Financing when it meets again in 2 weeks' time. And I thank Björn Kummel, the chair of the Working Group, for his leadership. One of the greatest risks to global health security now is to further weaken WHO or to further fragment the global health architecture. Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, The COVID-19 pandemic is a powerful demonstration that health is not a luxury, but a human right. Not a cost, but an investment. Not simply an outcome of development, but the foundation of social, economic, and political stability and security. In the coming months and years, other crises will demand our attention and distract us from the urgency of taking action now. Now is the time for all countries to make the choice to invest in a healthier, safer, and fairer future. Global health security is too important to be left to chance or goodwill or shifting geopolitical currents or the vested interests of companies and shareholders. That means a continuing commitment to universal health coverage built on the foundation of primary health care. I once again thank President Tokayev and the government of Kazakhstan, Rahmet, for his leadership in primary health care from Almata in 1978 to Astana in 2018. Albert Camus published his novel in 1947, the year before the Constitution of the World Health Organization came into effect. The Constitution is, of course, itself a treaty, a binding pact between nations, a vision that recognizes that the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human. But more than that, it affirms that health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security, and is dependent upon the fullest cooperation of individuals and states. Camus said that, I quote, "What's true of all the evils in the world is true of the plague as well. It helps men and women to rise above themselves," end of quote. In the aftermath of the Second World War, our forebears rose above themselves to found the United Nations and this World Health Organization. Now is our moment to rise above this pandemic, to rise above the impulses of isolationism, to rise above rivalry, suspicion, and mistrust, to rise above nearsightedness of election cycles and media cycles, to build on the legacy from which we have all benefited, and to leave a new legacy for the generations who will follow. Let it be said, decades from now, when each of us is nothing more than photographs and memories, that we left the world a healthier, safer, fairer place than we found it. I like this, so if you allow me, I will repeat. Let it be said, decades from now, when each of us is nothing more than photographs and memories, that we left the world a healthier, safer, fairer place than we found it. I thank you, and merci beaucoup, Chair.
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur général. Avant de poursuivre, permettez-moi de faire quelques remarques préliminaires. Madame Dechen Wangmo, présidente de l'Assemblée mondiale de l'OMS, chers collègues vice-présidents de l'Assemblée mondiale de l'OMS, Monsieur le Directeur général de l'OMS, Mesdames et Messieurs, je me réjouis de participer à cette deuxième session extraordinaire de notre organisation. Je voudrais adresser mes vives félicitations à la présidente du bureau de l'Assemblée mondiale pour son leadership dans la gestion des grands sujets de préoccupation de notre organisation depuis mai 2021, que nous avons été élus à la 74e Assemblée mondiale. Je voudrais, chers collègues, vous remercier de l'honneur qui est fait au Bénin à ma modeste personne pour présider en l'absence de notre présidente cette session. Chers collègues honorables invités, nous tenons cette deuxième session extraordinaire dans l'histoire de l'OMS dans un contexte particulier marqué par la pandémie de la COVID-19 qui n'épargne aucun pays, qui évolue de vague en vague, les unes plus meurtrières que les autres, avec des variants qui essaient de défier notre arsenal de riposte au quotidien. Le dernier en date, le variant Omicron, focalise toute notre attention depuis quelques jours. Je nous encourage à renforcer nos stratégies intégrées et concertées de riposte, notamment la vaccination, pour qu'ensemble et dans un délai raisonnable, nous puissions contrôler la propagation de ce virus dévastateur. Je salue à cet effet toutes les initiatives prises par la Direction générale de l'OMS pour faciliter l'accès équitable aux vaccins et à la vaccination contre la COVID-19, particulièrement pour les pays de la région africaine. Je voudrais réaffirmer tout le soutien des pays membres à notre directeur général pour son leadership extraordinaire et sa ténacité dans la coordination de nos actions communes en ces moments difficiles. Vous l'avez prouvé à suffisance par vos acclamations nourries. Chers collègues, honorables invités, partant des expériences vécues dans la gestion de la crise de la COVID-19, nous devons tous travailler à améliorer nos capacités collectives de réaction face aux menaces et urgences sanitaires de portée internationale afin de mieux protéger nos populations et rendre le monde plus sûr. C'est pourquoi j'apprécie à sa juste valeur que notre session examine le point principal inscrit à l'ordre du jour qui, justement, revient sur les avantages de disposer d'un instrument international sur la préparation et la riposte aux épidémies. Je remercie le groupe de travail des États membres sur le renforcement de la préparation et de la riposte de l'OMS aux urgences sanitaires pour les propositions pertinentes qui seront soumises à notre appréciation. Je reste convaincu qu'une approche globale et concertée est la voie la mieux indiquée pour faire face aux défis globaux de santé dans le monde et l'unique chemin pour l'atteinte des objectifs de développement durable. Je nous souhaite de fructueuses délibérations dans un esprit de tolérance et d'écoute les uns des autres. Je vous remercie. Cela me fait donc à la cérémonie d'ouverture. L'Assemblée mondiale de la santé va à présent examiner les procédures spéciales devant régir la conduite des séances hybrides de sa deuxième session extraordinaire qui figure à l'annexe du document SSA 2/2. Comme nous le savons tous, le document dont nous sommes saisis aujourd'hui a fait l'objet de consultations informelles faisant intervenir l'ensemble des États membres. Puis-je considérer que l'Assemblée de la santé se satisfait d'adopter les procédures spéciales figurant à l'annexe du document SSA 2/2 et de les appliquer à la présente session extraordinaire? Je ne vois aucune objection. Cette proposition est donc adoptée. Je vous remercie. Les États membres qui souhaitent présenter une motion d'ordre, exercer un droit de réponse ou demander une motion de procédure doivent le faire soit en levant la plaque portant le nom de leur État, si le membre de la délégation est physiquement présent, soit en envoyant un message au numéro de téléphone suivant par SMS ou par WhatsApp. Plus 41 79 467 28 70. Ce numéro est le même que celui utilisé par les États membres lors d'autres réunions récentes des organes directeurs et il peut être utilisé uniquement pour les motions d'ordre, les demandes de droit de réponse ou d'autres motions de procédure. Il ne doit être utilisé pour aucune autre question. En outre, je tiens à préciser que je propose d'accorder le droit de réponse s'il est demandé à la fin de chaque journée. Les délégués sont priés de veiller à ce que leurs interventions soient aussi brèves que possible et, par souci de l'horaire à respecter, il serait apprécié que ces interventions se limitent à 3 minutes au maximum. Les délégués à l'Assemblée mondiale de la santé se rappelleront peut-être qu'à la 74e session, la docteure Amelia Flores du Guatemala avait été élue vice-présidente pour la région des Amériques. Je pense savoir que depuis lors, la docteure
If you are
Flores...
the meeting host, please enter your host key followed by pound.
Je pense savoir que depuis lors, la docteure Flores n'est plus en mesure de siéger à ce poste. Dans ce contexte, la région des Amériques a tenu des consultations et propose que le docteur Francisco José Coma Martin, ministre de la Santé du Guatemala, soit élu vice-président. Puis-je considérer que l'Assemblée de la Santé est d'accord avec cette proposition? Nous avons quelques soucis avec la connexion Internet. Nous allons attendre quelques minutes que ça se rétablisse pour poursuivre les travaux. Merci.
You are in the meeting now.
Amesema hivyo, sikuona mimi.
Every advance we made, be it in the diagnostics, be it in the vaccine, came as a response of sharing risk, sharing knowledge, and sharing capacity. every advance we made, be it in the diagnostics, be it in the vaccine, came as a response of sharing risk, sharing knowledge, and sharing capacity.
Mesdames et messieurs, désolé pour la panne technique, nous allons reprendre les travaux dans 1 minute.
Recording in progress.
What's his name?
Recording stopped.
Merci, mesdames et messieurs. Nous allons reprendre les travaux. Désolé encore pour cette panne technique. Je vous prie de rejoindre vos places, s'il vous plaît. Nous allons reprendre les travaux. Mesdames et messieurs, je vous prie de rejoindre vos places, s'il vous plaît. Nous allons donc poursuivre avec les procédures spéciales. Donc, les délégués à l'Assemblée mondiale de la santé se rappelleront peut-être qu'à la 74e session, la docteure Amelia Flores du Guatemala avait été élue vice-présidente pour la région des Amériques. Je pense savoir que depuis lors, la docteure Flores n'est plus en mesure de siéger à ce poste. Dans ce contexte, la région des Amériques a tenu des consultations et propose que le docteur Francisco José Coma Martin, ministre de la Santé du Guatemala, soit élu vice-président. Puis-je considérer que l'Assemblée de la Santé est d'accord avec cette proposition? Je ne vois aucune objection. Cette proposition est donc adoptée. Passons maintenant au point 1.1 de l'ordre du jour. Adoption de l'ordre du jour. L'ordre du jour provisoire figure dans le document SSA2-1. L'Assemblée de la Santé est-elle disposée à adopter l'ordre du jour tel qu'il figure dans le document SSA2-1? Je vois la Slovénie lever. D'accord. La Slovénie, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. The European Union works closely with the World Health Organization on a wide range of subjects, both within the European region and on a global level. As agreed in the exchange of letters of 2000 between the WHO and the European Commission concerning the consolidation and intensification of cooperation, and without prejudice to any future conclusion of a general agreement between the WHO and the European Union delegation attends the meetings of the World Health Assembly as observer. As in previous sessions, we ask the Assembly to kindly agree that the European Union delegation be also invited to attend and participate without vote in the deliberations of the meetings of subcommittees, drafting groups, or other subdivisions thereof, addressing matters falling within Union competence in the second special session of the World Health Assembly. Thank you.
Je ne vois donc aucune objection par rapport à l'ordre du jour. L'ordre du jour est donc adopté. Je comprends que la délégation de la Slovénie a fait une proposition. Y a-t-il des objections par rapport à cette proposition qui a été faite par la Slovénie? Je ne vois aucune objection. L'emploi du temps quotidien préliminaire figure dans le document SSA2-1, ad 1. Après avoir examiné le point 1.2, pouvoir, l'Assemblée mondiale de la santé se penchera sur la seule question de fond qui lui est soumise, à savoir l'examen des avantages de l'élaboration d'une convention, d'un accord ou d'un autre instrument international de l'OMS sur la préparation et la riposte aux pandémies, en vue de la mise en place d'un processus intergouvernemental pour rédiger et négocier cette convention, cet accord ou cet autre instrument international sur la préparation et la riposte aux pandémies, en tenant compte du rapport du groupe de travail sur le renforcement de la préparation et de la riposte de l'OMS aux urgences sanitaires. La commission de vérification des pouvoirs tiendra sa réunion aujourd'hui à 13h, heure de Genève, sous une forme hybride. Pour les membres de la commission qui sont présents en personne, la réunion aura lieu dans la salle A. Les membres qui participent à distance auront reçu un lien pour leur permettre de se connecter à la réunion. La commission de vérification des pouvoirs soumettra son rapport en séance plénière demain, 30 novembre 2021, à 10h, heure de Genève. Je propose que l'Assemblée de la santé se réunisse chaque jour de 10h à 13h et de 14h à 17h, heure de Genève. Puis-je considérer que l'Assemblée de la santé est d'accord avec l'emploi du temps? Comme je ne vois aucune objection, cette proposition est donc adoptée. Je voudrais vous informer que les déclarations des États membres sont limitées à 3 minutes. Celles des observateurs, des représentants invités, des organisations des Nations Unies et des autres organisations intergouvernementales participantes sont limitées à 2 minutes et celles des acteurs non étatiques en relation officielle avec l'OMS à 1 minute. Les déclarations des régions et des groupes sont limitées à 4 minutes. Par ailleurs, comme les délégations s'en souviendront, l'ordre habituel pour la prise de parole débute par les États membres et les membres associés, suivis des observateurs de l'Organisation des Nations Unies et des autres organisations intergouvernementales avec lesquelles l'OMS a établi des relations effectives, et enfin des acteurs non étatiques en relations officielles. Cela signifie qu'un certain nombre de déclarations importantes doivent attendre la toute fin des discussions et n'ont de ce fait que peu de possibilités d'influencer le débat. Étant donné que la session extraordinaire se concentrera sur la COVID-19 et dans la mesure où de nombreux acteurs étatiques et non étatiques ont apporté une contribution inestimable à la lutte contre cette maladie, j'aimerais proposer qu'à titre exceptionnel, nous réservions du temps plus avant dans le débat, par exemple, de 16h30 à 17h, heure de Genève, la deuxième journée, et éventuellement quelques moments à l'ouverture de notre troisième journée pour prendre connaissance de certaines de ces déclarations. Je conçois bien que cela signifie toujours qu'un grand nombre de déclarations devront attendre jusqu'à la toute fin des débats. Y a-t-il des objections à cette proposition? Je ne vois aucune objection. Merci. Je voudrais également rappeler aux délégués qu'au moment de prononcer leur déclaration, il convient de ne pas parler trop rapidement, de manière à permettre l'interprétation de leur discours et ainsi faire en sorte que leur message passe clairement et précisément. Nous vous demandons de bien vouloir envoyer une copie écrite de vos déclarations à l'adresse électronique interprète@who.int. Cela ne vous empêche pas, lors de votre intervention, de vous écarter du texte fourni, mais cela facilite la clarté et la fiabilité de l'interprétation dans les langues officielles. Cela nous amène donc au terme de notre débat sur le point 1.1 de l'ordre du jour. Passons maintenant au point 1.2, pouvoir. Comme le prévoit l'article 24 de son règlement intérieur, l'Assemblée est tenue de nommer une commission de vérification des pouvoirs. Comme cette session sera brève et afin de simplifier les aspects procéduraux, je vous propose que la commission de vérification des pouvoirs nommée par la 74e Assemblée mondiale de la santé soit reconduite dans ses fonctions pour cette session extraordinaire. Je vous propose donc d'approuver la nomination des 12 États membres suivants: Andorre, Australie, Cameroun, Haïti, Islande, Mali, Monaco, Namibie, Panama, Singapour, Somalie et Thaïlande. Cette proposition peut-elle être acceptée? Je ne vois aucune objection. Je déclare donc la commission de vérification des pouvoirs telle que je l'ai proposée, nommée par l'Assemblée de la santé. Cela nous amène donc au terme de notre débat sur le point 1.2 de l'ordre du jour. Abordons maintenant le point 2 de l'ordre du jour. Examen des avantages de l'élaboration d'une convention, d'un accord ou d'un autre instrument international de l'OMS sur la préparation et la riposte aux pandémies en vue de la mise en place d'un processus intergouvernemental pour rédiger et négocier cette convention, cet accord ou cet autre instrument international sur la préparation et la riposte aux pandémies, en tenant compte du rapport du groupe de travail sur le renforcement de la préparation et de la riposte de l'OMS aux urgences sanitaires. Le rapport du groupe de travail des États membres sur le renforcement de la préparation et de la riposte de l'OMS aux urgences sanitaires à la session extraordinaire de l'Assemblée mondiale de la santé figure dans le document SSA2-3. Le document SSA2-1-2 contient un résumé de l'analyse du secrétariat préparé en vue d'un examen par le groupe de travail sur le renforcement de la préparation et de la riposte de l'OMS aux urgences sanitaires. Avant d'ouvrir le débat, je voudrais donner la parole au coprésident du groupe de travail sur le renforcement de la préparation et de la riposte de l'OMS aux urgences sanitaires afin qu'ils en présentent le rapport. Madame l'ambassadrice Grata Enda Waedaning-Tias et Monsieur Colin McCliff, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to address the Assembly and present the report. Your Excellencies and distinguished delegates, at the last World Health Assembly, Member States have decided to create a Member State working group with a dual mandate, first, to consider the finding and recommendation of the various review panels, and second, to prioritize the assessment of benefit of developing a WHO convention, agreement, or other international instrument on pandemic preparedness and response. To accomplish this mandate, the working group have met 5 times from July to November 2021 to facilitate discussion and conduct intersessional consultation on specific priorities identified by Member States. On behalf of the Bureau member, we would like to thank all Member States, numerous invited experts, and non-state actor participants for their collective support, wisdom, input, and constructive engagement, which enabled the working group to submit the report SSA2/3 to the World Health Assembly Special Session for its consideration as per mandate Decision 74/16. While the report itself is not perfect, we would like to emphasize that it represents a consensus view of all Member States, carefully drafted and negotiated over many days. We are grateful that this consensus is also reflected in the draft decision that the World Health Assembly will consider later this week. We hope the report can provide you with a clear pathway as it outlines both policy and programmatic priorities. As you consider the next step, including the working group recommendation concerning a new process to develop and negotiate a new instrument on pandemic preparedness and response, as well as to consider ways to strengthen the IHR. Now, please allow me to highlight some of the key aspects of the report that the Member States sees as best addressed in the new instrument. Among others, first, on equity. Member States agree that equity is critically important for global health, both as a principle and as an outcome. Member States emphasize that equity is essential, particularly in prevention, preparedness, and response to health emergency, including with respect to capacity building, equitable and timely access to and distribution of medical countermeasures, as well as to address barriers to timely access to and distribution of these medical countermeasures. Member States also see related issues such as research and development, intellectual property, technology transfer, empowering or scaling up local and regional manufacturing capacity during emergency to discover, develop, and deliver effective medical countermeasures and other tools and technology as a priority to be addressed. One health approach. This is also an area there is a strong prioritized interest. However, further elaboration and collaboration are needed, particularly as the One Health concept reaches beyond pandemic preparedness and response. Many aspects of this area may be beyond the scope of IHR, and it's complex. On prevention, rapid risk assessment, detection, and response. Some aspect of this topic could be handled under the discussion on strengthening the IHR 2005 implementation, compliance, and potential targeted amendments, while other could be incorporated under the new instrument. Now I would like to give the floor to my co-chair to continue with other key aspects where member states see the benefit to address in the new instrument.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Grata. As my co-chair has mentioned, equity and One Health are priority areas that could be addressed as current gaps by a new instrument. In addition, other areas identified in the report include compliance and accountability with IHR obligations. We note that while IHR 2005 has a dispute resolution provision, it remains unused to date. Finance. Member states recognize the need to provide WHO with adequate and sustainable financing so that WHO can play a leading and coordinating role in global health, while also recognizing the need for national investments and leadership from other actors and institutions. Resilient and rapid response to pandemics. By enhancing surge capacity through striving to achieve universal health coverage and health system strengthening, which includes the enhancement of primary health care, the health workforce, and social protection. Sample sharing, by enhancing and expanding networks, mechanisms, and incentives for sharing pathogens, genetic information, biological samples, and the benefits derived therefrom. Member states see sample sharing as important, as well as the need to develop proper incentives and benefits to support more equitable health emergency preparedness and response. Structural solutions was another area to promote whole of government and whole of society approach to pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, including other health emergencies. And finally, in this list of gaps that the report identifies, misinformation and disinformation, the need for national and global coordinated actions to address the misinformation, disinformation, and stigmatization that undermine public health. Following looking at the gaps we've just talked about, and looking at all of these technical areas outlined in SSA 2/3, based on the WGPR discussions thus far, we wanted to highlight for the Assembly that there is an emerging consensus that member states will need to continue their discussions on the feasibility of implementing the recommendations, particularly how to implement them through 3 policy-making tools available under WHO as follows. First, developing a new international instrument, the topic of this special session. Next, strengthening the IHR 2005, which many of our eminent speakers have already addressed. And then third, exploring the use of existing tools and mechanisms available under WHO, such as guidance documents, etc. As evidenced by the consensus reached this week, the WGPR has repeatedly reaffirmed the need to work in an efficient, effective, inclusive, consensus-based, and transparent manner. The work of the WGPR does not finish here. The WGPR will continue to discuss and review the recommendations of the review panels and propose recommendations and actions at WHA 75. And we wanted to share with the Assembly, in terms of a way forward for WGPR, that as a means to expedite the discussion, the Bureau of the WGPR is planning to launch a survey in the coming days to collect inputs from member states and other stakeholders on the 131 recommendations from the independent review panels and committees. The survey is aimed to indicate some basic prioritization among the recommendations and to provide initial input on feasibility and potential method of implementation through the available tools I mentioned earlier. We hope that the survey will help shape the discussions and focus the WGPR's work between February and May. We seek member states' cooperation to fill in the survey and return it to ensure a better representation of member states' views on which recommendations are deemed feasible and a priority for member states in strengthening the current health system in preparedness and response. We are aiming to have your input submitted by early January and look forward to reconvening as a working group prior to Executive Board 150. And we thank you very much for this opportunity to address the Assembly. Thank you very much.
Je vous remercie. Le débat est ouvert. Je voudrais demander au secrétariat de modérer la discussion sur la plateforme en ligne. La parole est au secrétariat.
Thank you very much, Vice President of the Assembly. We would start with our regional statements and then proceed to group statements and then national statements. I have the honor to invite Botswana to make a statement on behalf of the African region. Botswana, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, President. The Africa member states thank the barrier and member states of the working group on strengthening WHO preparedness for and response to health emergencies for the work undertaken during the past few months, as instructed by the 74th World Health Assembly Decision Number 16, to prioritize the assessment of the benefits of developing a WHO convention, agreement, or other international instrument on pandemic preparedness and response, and for reaching consensus on the report submitted to the Assembly for consideration. In our view, the report highlights the most pertinent issues in regards to pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, and demonstrates our shared vision to safeguard global public health. These priorities agreed upon include the need to address equity, strengthening international health regulation 2005 implementation and compliance, which will ensure adequate capacities for surveillance and rapid response to infectious disease outbreaks, sustainable financing for the WHO to enable it to play its leading and coordinating role in global health governance as enshrined in the WHO Constitution, as well as promoting a whole of government and whole of society approach to pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, including other health emergencies. The COVID-19 pandemic has revealed the weakness of the current global mechanisms on pandemic preparedness and response, exposed and further deepened inequalities and placed the multilateral system under scrutiny. Africa has suffered disproportionately in terms of access to essential countermeasures, including diagnostics, vaccines, and other life-saving treatments. While there has been a reduction in the number of reported COVID-19 infections, which is mostly attributed to non-pharmaceutical interventions, the vaccination coverage remains alarmingly low. Globally, of the 7.8 billion doses of vaccines that have been administered, only 2.78% have been administered in Africa region, which translates to 6.6% of the eligible population that is fully vaccinated, compared to more than 70% vaccination coverage in other regions. The global vaccine targets set by the WHO are for all countries to fully vaccinate 10% of their population by the end of September 2021, 40% by the end of December 2021, and 70% by mid-2022. This means that Africa needs up to 1.8 billion to reach 70% coverage, vaccine coverage. Against this backdrop, the Africa region strongly affirms that equity remains central for developing countries, in particular in our continent, due to the disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We appreciate the WGPR report underscoring the importance of equity and commitment to address it both as a guiding principle and outcome for the acceleration of progress towards universal health coverage. This will require mechanisms to be put in place that are able to support the achievement of equity through increased regional and local production and technology transfer. This will enable capacity development so that in the event of a public health emergency, we are also able to respond rapidly without reliance on aid. In this view, this also requires a strengthened health system to ensure that there's adequate capacity to rapidly deploy these tools and avert mortality and morbidity. The Africa region underscores the importance of the International Health Regulation 2005 in strengthening health system capacities at the national level and in averting international spread of the diseases. We, however, acknowledge its limitations as it lacks provisions related to critical issues such as accelerating innovation, pathogen and benefit sharing, local production and manufacturing capacity, global supply chains, access and distribution to diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. The need for and equitable access to funding and the accessibility of such funding during a global health crisis remains crucial. The resources at the global level should also support regional mechanisms in regards to pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. Chairperson, we reiterate our support to the WHO as the leading authority in global health emergency response and need of further strengthening this role. In this regard, we support the development of WHO convention or agreement or other international instrument on pandemic preparedness and response or legally binding instrument, and the launch of an intergovernmental negotiating body open to all member states. We propose that any international legal instrument on emergency preparedness and response should be negotiated and ratified under the WHO Constitution. The negotiations should be guided by the principles of transparency, inclusivity, solidarity, and enable adequate engagement of member states to reach consensus. In this view, there's need to ensure equitable and geographic representation in the negotiations. Furthermore, the relationship between a legal instrument and the existing IHR of 2005 would need to be clearly articulated and defined. It should be designed in a value-adding manner with a non-competing, non-undermining, and non-contradictory approach to the IHR of 2005. Lastly, Chairperson, we take note of the report of the Member States Working Group on Strengthening WHO's Preparedness and Response to Health Emergencies to the second special session of the World Health Assembly. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Botswana. May we now proceed to Iraq on behalf of the Eastern Mediterranean region. Iraq, you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can. You may kindly proceed.
Okay, thank you. I have the honor to make this statement on behalf of the 22 Eastern Mediterranean region member states and territories. We would like to start by thanking the Secretariat for preparing this exceptional session, which addresses a critical challenge that all countries are facing. We also note with appreciation the work of the Member States Working Group on Strengthening WHO Preparedness and Response to Health Emergencies and the contribution of its Bureau in facilitating and guiding the work over the last 5 months. IMRO countries endorse and support the working group position as reflected in the report presented by the working group on strengthening the international health regulation of 2005 as a key component of the global health architecture. We agree that this should be done through targeted amendments without reopening the entire instrument for negotiations. In this regard, we feel that this extremely important area of urgent reform and action and the process of how these amendments will be conducted should receive further discussions during the next meeting of the working group next month. Ladies and gentlemen, we all agreed that some important aspects of health emergency preparedness and response may not be completely addressed within the scope of the IHR, and therefore a potential new instrument may be needed. The working group report mentions a number of potential benefits of a new legally binding instrument, like in the area of equity, One Health approach, sustainable financing, and sharing of pathogens, samples, and genetic informations. In this respect, countries of the region would like to specially prioritize and addresses the recommendations that focus on gaps in governance and leadership, on adequate and sustainable financing, and on equity, particularly in relation to improving unrestricted, equitable, and timely access to the vaccines and medical countermeasures. Equity issues remains paramount for our region, who bear the disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. While the IHR currently remains the key instrument on pandemic preparedness and the required amendment is a critical area for action, countries of the region believe areas that may benefit from a new instrument will require serious action for considering the development of WHO legally binding instrument, and therefore we support the establishment of an intergovernmental negotiating body that will start a clear, transparent, inclusive, and member state-led process to identify the substantive elements and modalities of negotiations within a realistic timeline, taking into account the need to address the potential risks mentioned in the WGPR report. Finally, our vision is health for all and by all. We truly look forward to the discussion during this special session and hope that with your leadership, President, a roadmap that supports achieving this vision is materialized. We also look forward to the continuation of the working group discussion on the mandate under Resolution WHA 74.7 and the report to the next regular session of the Assembly. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Iraq, on behalf of the Eastern Mediterranean region. I now invite Fiji on behalf of the Western Pacific region. Fiji, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor of making this statement on behalf of the member states of the Western Pacific region. We are a highly diverse group comprising some of the world's smallest countries and some of its largest. While our circumstances differ, all of us have felt the devastating impacts of COVID-19. We are committed together to end this pandemic and to do all we can to ensure the world is better positioned to prevent, prepare, and respond to future pandemics. Madam President, Director General Dr. Tedros, distinguished colleagues, we in the Western Pacific have learned valuable lessons from previous health emergencies, including SARS in 2002 and MERS in 2014. The health system capabilities we have built for infection prevention and control, our response tools, and community resilience have been instrumental in limiting the pandemic's reach. The rapid application of proven public health measures has in many cases allowed us to effectively contain outbreaks, even in low-resource settings and small health systems. The member states of the Western Pacific fully support the decision to establish an intergovernmental negotiating body to draft and negotiate a global instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response under the WHO Constitution. As we work together to develop the instrument, we will bring our regional experiences into the global discussion. One key lesson is the importance of continuing learning for improvement and of combining emergency planning with system readiness, as we have done under the Asia-Pacific Strategy for Emerging Disease and Public Health Emergencies, which is our common framework for implementing the international health regulations. The risk of emerging disease is ever present, and we see strengthened surveillance as critically important, with a One Health approach working collaboratively across the human, animal, environmental, and food sectors. We need to ensure WHO remains at the center of a global health system, preserving its mandate and recognizing member states' reliance on its normative and operational functions, which is essential for protecting our populations from health crises. Finally, and most importantly, solidarity must be the foundation of the new instrument. Only together with a focus on equity can we ensure that in the future we are equipped to prevent, prepare, and respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiji. And now I invite Slovenia on behalf of the European Union. Slovenia, you have the floor, please.
Director General, Excellencies, colleagues. I have the honor of speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries, the Republic of North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Albania, the country of the stabilization and association process, and potential candidate Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, and also Georgia, aligned themselves with this statement. The date, there are over 5 million dead, more than 256 million infected, and billions of others have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. which continues to rage globally. It is one of the greatest health emergencies in our recent history. It has brought us to a special session of the World Health Assembly, where we commit to prevent, be better prepared for, and better respond to the next pandemic threat. We acknowledge the unprecedented effort of many stakeholders that have led to this assembly. We wish to express our gratitude to the work of the Working Group of Strengthening WHO Preparedness and Response and its Bureau, unwavering engagement of the member states, invaluable support from the WHO Secretariat and independent experts. The European Union and its member states are committed to strengthening the global health architecture with an empowered and sustainably financed WHO at the center. We have so far demonstrated this in numerous processes, such as championing the WHA 73.1 and WHA 74.7 resolutions, playing a crucial role in setting up and supporting the ACT Accelerator and COVAX and increasing financial contributions to the WHO. We continue to work hard for the development of new ambitious instruments on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. We strongly welcome the consensus reached at this session, which gives us a sense of joint purpose to achieve this goal as the world together. We believe a new legal instrument under Article 19 of the WHO Constitution in urgently need to address glaring inequities in the pandemic response and the shortcomings of the current legal framework highlighted by several reviews. Furthermore, it will enable us to address key issues, including a One Health approach, early development and equitable access to pandemic countermeasures, data and sample sharing, to name a few. We need to ensure compliance and coherence across the lines of work to follow. We call for an ambitious process in developing this instrument, but not at the expense of inclusivity or equality. The European Union continues to stand ready to engage constructively and in further discussions on other ways of strengthening WHO based on the recommendations of the independent experts bodies and member states. Excellencies, the pandemic has caused immeasurable damage in terms of lives lost, economic distress, and social upheaval. Now, as the world watches and cognizant of the responsibility that rests on our shoulders, let us say never again to being unprepared and advance with ambitious multilateral commitment and engagement towards a new building instruments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, European Union. Brazil, on behalf of Mercosur, you have the floor, please.
Muchas gracias, estimado señor director general de la OMS, estimados delegados y colegas. Mucho nos complace realizar esta intervención en nombre de Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay y de mi propio país, Brasil, en su calidad de presidente pro tempore del Mercosur. Estamos reunidos en Ginebra con el propósito común de fortalecer el sistema global de preparación y respuesta a emergencias de salud. Al definir los próximos pasos en este proceso, nos gustaría enfatizar la importancia de la transparencia y de la inclusividad en todo el proceso de negociación, tanto en lo que corresponde al órgano de negociación intergubernamental, INB, como del grupo de trabajo sobre el fortalecimiento de las capacidades de preparación y respuesta de la OMS, WGPR. Las decisiones consensuadas en tales órganos deben ser el resultado de un amplio proceso de consultas, respetando el principio de la representatividad de todos los Estados miembros. al expresar nuestro copatrocinio al proyecto de decisión como marco de nuestro compromiso de participar constructivamente de los trabajos, manifestamos nuestro interés en ofrecer la contribución de uno de los países del Mercosur en la composición del Buró del nuevo INB. Al tiempo en que avanzamos en los trabajos en los dos ejes negociadores, es fundamental asegurar la coherencia y coordinación entre las discusiones del INB y del WGPR, organismo que seguirá debatiendo las recomendaciones relacionadas con la pandemia COVID-19, tendientes a mejorar las capacidades nacionales de preparación, comunicación, respuesta y evaluación rápida de riesgos. En las discusiones relacionadas con la negociación de un nuevo convenio, acuerdo o instrumento internacional y una posible adecuación del Reglamento Sanitario Internacional bajo los auspicios de la OMS, la defensa de sistemas nacionales de salud fuertes y resilientes y la equidad en el acceso a las contramedidas, en particular el acceso justo y equitativo a los diagnósticos, tratamientos e inmunizantes son prioridades para nuestros países. El pasado 19 de noviembre, aprobamos la declaración de los ministros de salud del Mercosur sobre la necesidad de expansión de la capacidad productiva regional de medicamentos, inmunizantes y tecnologías de salud. Acordamos la creación de un comité ad hoc para promover este objetivo a partir del análisis de nuestras capacidades de producción y de investigación y posterior identificación de posibles complementariedades entre nuestras cadenas de producción. Frente a tal reto, nos sentimos especialmente honrados de tener los dos países del Mercosur, Argentina y Brasil, seleccionados por la OMS para albergar centros regionales para el desarrollo y producción de vacunas de ARN mensajero en la región de las Américas. Esperamos contar con la cooperación técnica de la OMS y de la Organización Panamericana de la Salud para que estas iniciativas puedan apalancar nuestra producción y, en consecuencia, asegurar el acceso a la salud para nuestra población. Señoras y señores, nuestros países están comprometidos con las discusiones relacionadas al fortalecimiento del sistema internacional de alerta, preparación y respuesta ante emergencias sanitarias, incluidas las pandemias. Consideramos sumamente importante que los debates prioricen la evaluación de las recomendaciones de los tres paneles, así como el compromiso de la OMS en implementar las recomendaciones que son exclusiva responsabilidad del organismo. Afirmamos nuestro compromiso de continuar contribuyendo de manera constructiva y proactiva al fortalecimiento de nuestras capacidades básicas de preparación y respuesta, de manera que estemos juntos enfrentando esta pandemia y preparándonos para futuras emergencias sanitarias. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Brazil. May I now invite the Russian Federation on behalf of the Union States of Russia and Belarus. Russian Federation, you have the floor, please.
Уважаемый господин генеральный директор, уважаемые коллеги. Я имею честь выступить от имени Российской Федерации и Республики Беларусь.
Russian Federation, if I may, could you kindly increase the volume? We can barely hear you. Please proceed. Thank you.
Надеюсь, теперь меня будет лучше слышно.
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
Уважаемый господин генеральный директор, уважаемые коллеги, имею честь выступить от имени Российской Федерации и Республики Беларусь как государств-участников союзного государства. Пандемия новой коронавирусной инфекции выявила уязвимые места в международной системе готовности и реагирования на вспышки.
Russian Federation, I crave your kind indulgence and apologies once again. Honorable Minister, Honorable Minister, if I may, I crave your kind indulgence, Honorable Minister. We do not appear to have interpretation in English at the moment.
базу дальнейших практических действий.
Sorry, Honorable Minister, our sincere apologies. It appears we don't have English interpretation. Could I get confirmation that English interpretation is available? We do. Thank you very much. Honorable Minister, if I may ask you to start once again your statement and sincere apologies. Please start.
Thank you for understanding. One more time. Уважаемый генеральный директор, уважаемые коллеги, имею честь выступить от имени Российской Федерации и Республики Беларусь как государств-участников союзного государства. Пандемия новой коронавирусной инфекции выявила уязвимые места в международной системе готовности и реагирования на вспышки опасных инфекционных заболеваний. Очевидна необходимость укрепления глобального потенциала в сфере предотвращения и противодействия пандемиям и другим чрезвычайным ситуациям в области здравоохранения. Совместными усилиями нам предстоит сформировать прочную международную правовую базу дальнейших практических действий на всех уровнях. Это очень трудоемкая задача, решение которой возможно только в рамках комплексного подхода и на основе глубокого экспертного анализа. Искусственно форсировать данную работу даже опасно.
Honorable Minister, I really do crave your indulgence, and I think we've really exhausted your good faith. And we have to make sure that we have interpretation in all 6 official languages when the member states are delivering a statement. And that is why we will crave your kind indulgence. If you would just bear with us, we will proceed to the next speaker and then come back to you so that we can address the interpretation challenges for the English booth. Would that be acceptable to you, Honorable Minister?
Yes, of course. I'm waiting for you.
Thank you very much for your kind indulgence. Could we proceed to South Africa on behalf of the group of 6 African countries and then come back to Russian Federation? South Africa, you have the floor, please. South Africa, you have the floor, please. We do not appear to have South Africa online to deliver the statement. Could I have some indication that we have English interpretation now? That does not appear to be the case. South African delegation, are you in the position to make your statement? We do not have South African delegation. We would proceed to member state statements and then come back to the Russian Federation so we can hear their intervention on behalf of the Union State of Russia and Belarus. If I may, could I please proceed then to Portugal? Portugal, you have the floor, please.
Dear colleagues, excellencies, I have the honor to address the Assembly on behalf of Portugal. We align ourselves with the statement by the European Union. The current pandemic has proved more than ever that health is an essential pillar for the development of our societies and for economic resilience. Therefore, prevention, preparedness, detection and response to health threats, including pandemics, must be a global priority. As the pandemic response was found to be inefficient and unequal, preparing for future crises requires more than just business as usual. The many challenges we went through require a renewed political commitment. Over the past few months, We, the member states, together with WHO, have engaged in a serious discussion. Our purpose is to correct shortcomings and strengthen health systems. Our work was based on lessons learned. This is what brings us here today. I would like to highlight 3 ideas. First, the consensus on the importance and centrality of WHO in the global health architecture. As we champion multilateralism as the path to better prepare for future threats, we also need a stronger WHO with a leadership role. Second, the need for a human rights approach in all health questions. We recognize the urgency to prioritize the needs of vulnerable populations, such as migrants, women, and girls. The mental health conditions of the populations must also play a big part in our planning for future public health emergencies. Third, this special session was convened to further our ambition and decide collectively on the path ahead. So we need to continue to work constructively and with a sense of urgency. We must engage in a legally binding instrument that ensures that in the future we all follow the lessons we learned with this crisis. And the efforts, also urgent to update the international health regulation, must continue and gather speed. Chair, a final word on the ongoing work on the Universal Health and Preparedness Review. This will complement any conclusion we will reach on this assembly. By itself, this review will be a great opportunity to improve global capacities as a joint effort. The universal character, all of society and all of government approach, as well as its focus on national progress in the health sector and preparedness, can be a game-changer tool. We are proud to be amongst the first to participate in this effort. Conscious of the historic moment we are living, we remain committed to global health security in line with the guidance of WHO, assuring global citizens their health and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Portugal. We understand that there's still no interpretation in English at the moment. I'm not entirely sure if the intervention from Peru will be in Spanish. If it is, I would crave your kind indulgence to move to Slovenia, and then we'll come back to Peru. If that is acceptable, Peru, Slovenia, you have the floor, please.
Colleagues, Slovenia aligns itself with the statement of the EU and its member states presented by our minister just before. Given the new facts, we are justifiably concerned that we are still a long way from overcoming the one of the greatest health crises in human history, the COVID-19 epidemic. While much better prepared for this last wave, our health systems are still challenged in many ways. Having a strong primary healthcare is certainly an advantage. However, the dual track approach after a certain period of time affects access to services, in particular those for chronic patients, mental health and prevention. The relocation of staff and the continued concern for sufficient capacity for the most severe cases of COVID place a heavy burden on health systems and health professionals. We can see already now that this prolonged state of emergency contributes to a widening gap of inequalities in our populations. It is evident that investments, not only financial, will be needed to strengthen our response capacities and ensure better preparedness for such crises. Even more worrying are the unjustified inequalities in access to COVID-19 countermeasures. While this is most hard felt by the developing countries, we can witness already today that no one is immune to the consequences of inequity. We have seen admirable acts of solidarity, for example, through ACTA and COVAX, but this is clearly not enough. We should strive to find innovative ways of working together to respond to future crises at the global level better and faster. Over the last almost 2 years, there has been a plethora of recommendations put forward by the WHO, member states, and independent bodies led by experts and political leaders. Slovenia thanks them for their unwavering efforts and strong leadership. They have also pointed out that there are serious gaps in the current global health architecture. To address them, we need to put equity and solidarity at the heart of our efforts. We are convinced that we can do it better and that now we have the opportunity. We have a historic decision in front of us to embark on a journey towards a new legally binding instrument against pandemic. We believe that this new instrument will allow us to address many aspects of pandemic prevention, preparedness and response, such as One Health, sample sharing, health emergency health workforce, access to countermeasures, and so on. Above all, it will allow us to institutionalize our commitment to equity and solidarity. Slovenia welcomes this opportunity and invites other delegations to adopt this decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Slovenia. If I may, I'll move to Pakistan. You have the floor. Pakistan, Ambassador Hashmi, you have the floor, please.
Dear Jude, this is Hussein. We have some technical problems. If you can shift the statement to the second session, please, in the afternoon, you would be obliged. Thank you.
Well noted, Pakistan. We will then proceed to Kenya. You have the floor. Delegation of Kenya, you have the floor, please. Kenya, are you in a position to make your statement?
Yeah.
Please proceed. Kenya.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to address this special session of the World Health Assembly at a time when the global nature of our interactions just came into sharp focus with the new COVID-19 variants. Now more than ever before, we are faced by a world in which transport is so advanced that one can get to any corner of the world in a day. Similarly, viruses and pathogens can be removed across borders in no time. Therefore, presuming that it's possible to deal with COVID-19 and other pandemics single-handedly is at best delusional and at worst dangerous. Mr. Chairman, President, it is therefore important that as a global community, we approach our fight against pandemics such as COVID-19 with a military approach. Together, and with all the ammunition at our disposal, the world must work as a single army, defending ourselves against an enemy that is attacking all of us indiscriminately. A silo mentality and knee-jerk reactions will neither be sustainable nor effective. Mr. President, we need a paradigm shift which will inform our actions. The establishment of protocols and instruments in the form of a treaty and a global approach to current and future health challenges is the beginning of this. The new thinking will, for instance, inform and educate us that vaccine equity and a holistic approach to its use is the only way we can defeat COVID-19. In this regard, our future is interrelated. Ladies and gentlemen, as highlighted in the African Group non-paper, Kenya believes equity should be both a guiding principle and a goal. We welcome discussions on the elements of the treaty to address the following key priorities. One is equitable access and distribution of medical and other countermeasures as global public goods. Global coordination and funding for research and development. Number three, establishment of mechanisms for timely sharing of information and technologies, including know-how for rapid scale-up of regional and local manufacturing. And fourth, lifting of unnecessary trade, travel, and other barriers hampering the ability of member states to mount effective preventive and response measures. I therefore invite the World Health Organization member states to stand up to be counted on the right side of history by taking the bold step to negotiate a legally binding treaty on pandemics. In doing so, we call for the strengthening of the World Health Organization. The time to act is now. I thank you.
I thank you very much, Kenya. I believe we now have interpretation in English, and I would like to go back to the Russian Federation on behalf of the Union State of Russia and Belarus. Thank you very much for your forbearance, Honorable Minister. You have the floor now, please.
I guess it's stress test for us with technical support today. No problem.
Thank you very much. Please proceed, Honorable Minister.
Уважаемый господин генеральный директор, уважаемые коллеги, имею честь выступить от имени Российской Федерации и Республики Беларусь как государств союзных. Пандемия новой коронавирусной инфекции выявила уязвимые места в международной системе готовности и реагирования на вспышки опасных инфекционных заболеваний. Очевидна необходимость укрепления глобального потенциала в сфере предотвращения и противодействия пандемиям и другим чрезвычайным ситуациям в области здравоохранения. Совместными усилиями нам предстоит сформировать прочную международную правовую базу для дальнейших действий на всех уровнях. Это очень трудоемкая задача, решение которой возможно только в рамках комплексного подхода и на основе глубокого экспертного анализа. Искусственно форсировать данную работу контрпродуктивно и опасно. Всемирная организация здравоохранения занимает особое место в существующей системе международных отношений, являясь уникальной площадкой для согласования и принятия решений по вопросам глобального здравоохранения. Безусловно, поддерживаем координирующую и лидирующую роль ВОЗ в многосторонних усилиях по защите населения от угроз эпидемий инфекционных болезней. Выступаем категорически против создания механизмов, которые дублируют работу ВОЗ и претендуют на глобальную координирующую роль в сфере борьбы с эпидемиями и другими направлениями. Призываем к укреплению и неукоснительному соблюдению международных медико-санитарных правил, которые должны оставаться ключевым элементом системы готовности и реагирования на чрезвычайные ситуации санитарно-эпидемиологического характера. Любые предложения о внесении точечных изменений в МСП должны быть обсуждены и обоснованы. Придаем большое значение деятельности рабочей группы государств-членов по усилению готовности ВОЗ к чрезвычайным ситуациям в области здравоохранения и реагированию на них. Приветствуем достигнутый в рамках группы консенсус в отношении целесообразности разработки конвенции, соглашения или иного международного инструмента ВОЗ по борьбе с пандемиями. Принципиально важно, что группа подтвердила значение МСП, медико-санитарных правил, как основного юридически обосновывающего документа по вопросам обеспечения готовности к чрезвычайным ситуациям в сфере здравоохранения. Недопустимо, чтобы новый инструмент создавал предпосылки к изменению, ослаблению или дублированию действующих механизмов и соглашений, включая медико-санитарные правила. Поддерживаем решение о создании открытого для государств-членов межправительственного переговорного органа по разработке новой конвенции или инструмента приоритетной задачи на ближайшие месяцы является согласование круга ведения и методов работы межправительственного переговорного органа. Необходимо четко определить полномочия сопредседателей и их заместителей, модальности участия наблюдателей от неправительственных организаций, зафиксировать принцип консенсуса при принятии решений. Убеждены, что межправительственный процесс разработки соглашения или инструмента ВОЗ должен быть инклюзивным, прозрачным и эффективным. Готовы к конструктивному взаимодействию со всеми партнерами в интересах консенсуса. Российская Федерация готова присоединиться к решению Всемирной Ассамблеи здравоохранения в качестве соавтора. Благодарю вас за внимание.
Thank you very much, Russian Federation, and apologies once again. I think I may want to give the floor back to the Vice President of the Assembly before we proceed. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le modérateur. Désolé pour toutes les petites pannes techniques qu'il y a eu. Nous sommes dans le nouvel immeuble de l'OMS, un immeuble majestueux qui abrite le siège de l'OMS, et lesquels réglages sont en cours pour que nous puissions poursuivre de manière sereine les travaux. Nous sommes maintenant arrivés à la fin de notre première séance. Nous reprendrons nos travaux cet après-midi à 14h, heure de Genève, pour poursuivre l'examen du point 2 de l'ordre du jour. Je voudrais rappeler que la commission de vérification des pouvoirs tiendra sa réunion aujourd'hui à 13h, heure de Genève, sous une forme hybride. Pour les membres de la commission qui sont présents en personne, la réunion aura lieu dans la salle A. Et les membres qui participent à distance auront reçu déjà un lien pour leur permettre de se connecter à la réunion. La séance est donc levée. Merci.
Recording stopped.
Mr. Vice President, just an announcement from the Secretariat. We understand that lunch would be available for delegates that are in the room. If you so wish to stay here, lunch will be provided for you. Of course, if you do want to go outside, that is also entirely acceptable, but there is provision of lunch in the room for you if you wish to remain here. Thank you very much.